What if memory could lie to us? Not intentionally, not with malice, but through the quiet erosion of time, through the fragile mechanism of perception. In every generation, there are stories that refuse to fade, whispers of moments that stretch beyond our understanding, events so carefully documented, so steeped in physical evidence or shared memory, they defy easy dismissal. They linger at the edges of history, the blurry boundary between what was and what could have been. This is not a story of conspiracy. It is a journey through the human fascination with time. For centuries, we've tried to hold it still, in sundials and calendars, in books and photographs. And yet, in the corners of our culture, hidden in diaries, buried in forgotten archives, passed on in family tales, something peculiar emerges. People who seem to know too much too soon, places where time appeared to fold in on itself, machines and minds that carried the blueprints of futures not yet born. This narrative begins not with a machine, but with a question. What if time doesn't move in a straight line? In the year 2000, the Internet was still young. Forums crackled with mystery, speculation, and late-night confessions. Among them appeared a name, John Titor. He claimed to be a soldier from the year 2036. His mission? To retrieve a forgotten IBM computer for reasons that only made sense to someone who understood the chaos to come. But it wasn't his mission that captivated people. It was the way he spoke, precise, detailed, technical, as if he were someone who had seen what lay ahead. He wrote of pocket-sized computers and global communication long before smartphones became the norm. He warned of growing political divides in America, the rise of surveillance, and the ways fear would quietly dismantle freedom. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. His final words were clinical, almost detached. There are only a few safety items I need to check before I leave. No drama, no flourish, just the quiet exit of someone who may have never been real, or may have been more real than we dared believe. The years passed, and yet many of his claims began to echo in reality. Black holes at CERN, political unrest, ubiquitous technology. His legacy lingered not just in message boards, but in the strange familiarity of the world he described. Skeptics call it coincidence. Others whisper about planted fiction. But some ask a deeper question. Could he have been part of a loop? A message meant not to warn, but to test our memory, to see if we notice when prophecy becomes presence. Time travel, if it exists, would not announce itself with spectacle. It would arrive quietly, in the margins. Through a photograph, a sentence, a name we weren't supposed to know yet. This series is not about proving the impossible. It's about listening to those margins, because perhaps the future has already happened, and we've just forgotten to notice. So we begin. Not to find answers, but to follow the trail of a question that has haunted us since the first sundial marked a shadow. What if time isn't what we think it is? It started with a collision in the heart of New York City. June 1950. A man appeared in Times Square, not slowly, not hesitantly, but suddenly, as if dropped from the sky. Within moments, he stepped into traffic and was killed by a passing taxi. A tragedy, yes, but not uncommon in a city like Manhattan. What made the incident unforgettable was what police found on his body. His name was Rudolph Fentz. At least, that's what the identification in his wallet claimed. But everything else about him belonged to another century. He wore a black frock coat and shoes with buttons, garments from the 1870s. His money was old, the kind no longer in circulation, yet pristine. A copper beer token from a long-demolished saloon. Brass items engraved with long-forgotten businesses. And no trace of anything modern. No documents, no keys, no watch. He looked confused, witnesses said, disoriented, like a man who'd never seen neon lights or cars before. Then he was gone. The investigation led nowhere until a detective named Hubert V. Rihm took interest. Digging into ancient missing persons reports, he found something chilling. In 1876, a man named Rudolph Fentz had vanished during an evening walk in New York. His description? Identical. Age, height, clothing, even his mannerisms as remembered by his family. The case had never been solved. Rihm found more, a phone directory listing for Rudolph Fentz Jr. The son, now an old man, recalled his father disappearing when he was a child. One moment there, the next vanished without a trace. He showed the detective a photo. It was him, the man from Times Square. Was it possible? Had Fentz somehow traveled through time, fallen forward into a world unrecognizable? Official channels didn't want the story. It was filed quietly, pushed to the back of the archive. But those who worked the case never forgot it. The details were too clean, too precise. No signs of fraud or hoax, just a man out of time. In the decades since, skeptics have tried to debunk the tale, calling it fiction, a myth born from confusion. But those who studied the records, who traced the money, the clothing, the tokens, found pieces that didn't fit conventional explanations. And perhaps that's the point. Not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are there to remind us of the limits of what we understand. Maybe time doesn't need machines. Maybe sometimes it slips, like a seam undone. And a man walking through a quiet park in 1876 finds himself standing in the chaos of Times Square, his heart racing as the lights blind him. Then, impact. And silence. What if he was never meant to be found? And what if the threads of our reality are thinner than we think, held together not by certainty, but by belief? It began as a simple stroll beneath the French sun. August 10, 1901. Two English academics, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, wandered the manicured gardens of Versailles. They were scholars, methodical and grounded, not the sort to chase ghosts. But what they experienced that day would pull them into a mystery that defied not just history, but time itself. The change was subtle at first, a hush in the air, a strange heaviness pressing down. The colors around them faded to a dull hue, as if the light itself had been filtered through memory. Then came the people. A man in a long cloak, gardeners with old-fashioned tools, a woman sitting on the grass, sketching. All of them dressed in 18th century clothing. Yet none seemed out of place, except to the two women. The woman sketching looked up at them with an expression both serene and distant. Her face was pale, her features strikingly familiar. It wasn't until later that Moberly and Jourdain would recognize her from portraits, Marie Antoinette. They left the gardens in silence. That night, each wrote down what they had seen, separately, without sharing. When they compared notes days later, the overlap was uncanny. The same people, the same paths, the same sense of drifting into another time. But they didn't stop there. Over the next decade, they launched an investigation, cross-referencing historical maps, researching forgotten garden layouts, verifying obscure details only historians would know. Time and again, their memories matched features of Versailles as it had been in the summer of 1789, months before the French Revolution. Paths that had been erased. Buildings long demolished. People whose names had faded from common record. And yet, the two women described them with eerie accuracy. Their book, An Adventure, published in 1911, ignited debate across Europe. Some dismissed it as fantasy. Others, particularly researchers of psychical phenomena, saw it as one of the most compelling time-slip accounts ever recorded. Even French authorities quietly confirmed aspects of their story: private maps, structural details, archival records that had never been made public. What happened that day in Versailles? Did they step through a crack in time? Did they see echoes of the past, caught in some temporal loop? Or was it something else entirely? A projection of memory, a collision of perception and reality so vivid it blurred the line between history and presence. Skeptics still try to explain it away. Mass hallucination, misidentification, literary fabrication. But none can account for the precision of the details, the ones that shouldn't have been knowable. Perhaps the past never truly disappears. Perhaps it lingers, not as dust in books, but as imprints in place. And sometimes, when the light bends just right, when the air thickens and memory awakens, we find ourselves walking beside ghosts. Not spirits, perhaps, but lives lived fully, once, now flickering at the edges of time. And if Versailles can still echo with 1789, where else might time be listening? It arrived in the form of a letter, yellowed, unassuming, but crackling with something that felt electric. 1955. Morris Jessup, an astronomer and writer on UFO phenomena, opened an envelope that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Inside was a message from a man who called himself Carl Allen, or sometimes Carlos Allende. What the letter described was not just a military experiment, but a rupture in time itself. According to Allen, in 1943, the U.S. Navy had conducted an experiment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The goal, to render a destroyer, the USS Eldridge, invisible to radar. But what unfolded was something far stranger. The ship didn't just disappear from sight. It vanished entirely, only to reappear minutes later in another location. And the crew? Allen claimed he witnessed sailors who had been altered by the experience. Some became invisible at will, or against it. Others phased in and out of existence, slipping through walls, vanishing mid-sentence. One aged 30 years in moments. Another became fused to the bulkhead of the ship, alive, but screaming. A few never returned. The military, Allen said, quickly silenced the survivors. Records were sealed, logs disappeared. The men were scattered across assignments, but the damage had already been done. Some sailors, he insisted, never returned to linear time. They existed out of sequence, lost in a sea of fragmented moments. Jessup was rattled. The letter wasn't written like a fantasy. It included precise knowledge of electromagnetic field theory, unified field equations, and relativistic physics that seemed decades beyond a merchant marine's expertise. When the U.S. Navy unexpectedly republished Jessup's book, filled with handwritten annotations referencing the letter and Allen's ideas, it deepened the mystery. Why would the government take such interest in what should have been fringe speculation? No official record of the Philadelphia experiment has ever been confirmed. The Navy denies it happened. The logs of the Eldridge from that period are missing. Allen himself vanished and reappeared over the years, alternately lucid and rambling. His credibility eroded, but the core of his story remained consistent. And then there were the side notes. Strange news clippings from 1943. Reports of sailors who walked into bars and vanished. Men who claimed to be from other times. Brief mentions in hospital logs of sailors experiencing temporal disorientation. Coincidences, perhaps, or fragments of something darker. Time is not just a river. It's a current with depth, undertow, and strange whirlpools that might catch those who stray too far from the shore. If the Philadelphia experiment happened, even partially, it suggests that the fabric of time isn't as seamless as we believe. That our experiments with energy, gravity, and magnetism might one day punch holes into realities we're not ready to face. Maybe the sailors of the Eldridge weren't lost. Maybe they're still drifting, not across oceans, but across decades. And maybe, just maybe, time itself remembers. What if a single frame of film could capture the impossible? Hollywood, 1928. Charlie Chaplin was premiering his silent masterpiece, The Circus, at the iconic Grauman's Chinese Theater. The sidewalks pulsed with the energy of early cinema, black coats, bowler hats, laughter beneath marquee lights. The world was about to enter the golden age of film. But buried in the archival footage of that evening, unseen for decades, was a woman. She moves across the screen casually, almost unnoticed, until you see what she's doing. One hand is lifted to her ear, fingers curled around a small, dark object. She's speaking, nodding slightly, responding as if on a call. The motion is unmistakable to modern eyes. She is using what appears to be a cell phone. But this was 1928. George Clark, a film historian, discovered the moment while reviewing old footage for a documentary. He slowed the frame, enhanced the image, studied the angles. The woman's movements were too natural, too precise. Not pantomime, not performance, as if she knew what she was doing, because it was routine for her. Experts reviewed the footage. No tampering, no superimposition. The reel was genuine. Kodak specialists confirmed it. The frames hadn't been altered. And yet the object in her hand matched the size, shape, and manner of a modern communication device. She didn't fit. Her clothes, while close to the era, carried tiny inconsistencies. Stitching not used at the time, a fabric sheen subtly off. Her hairstyle looked almost right, but just slightly too refined, too precise. And perhaps most telling, no one around her seemed to notice. Not a glance. Not a single person stopped or reacted to her strange behavior. Who was she? Despite extensive research, no records place her at the premiere. She appears on no guest lists, no press photos. No one ever came forward to say they remembered her. Some have argued she was simply holding an early hearing aid, but no such device matched what's seen in the footage. Others suggested it was a hoax, but with no digital manipulation and no commercial benefit, the theory rings hollow. And then there were the anomalies. Other faces in the crowd who, on closer inspection, seemed equally displaced. Suits with stitching patterns decades ahead. Gait and posture subtly modern, as if a handful of observers from another time had slipped into the premiere unnoticed. Tourists, perhaps, watching the dawn of mass entertainment. What if time travel doesn't come with fanfare? What if it looks exactly like this? A quiet woman in the background, watching, recording, existing just long enough to be caught on a single frame of film. Cinema is a mirror. It captures not just faces, but moments in history. But sometimes that mirror reflects something else, a visitor not meant to be seen. We rewind, we analyze, we search for logic. And all the while, she walks on, her expression calm, her path unbending, a question frozen in celluloid. What if she wasn't just watching the film? What if she was watching us? It began with a leak under the sink. August 2006, in the quiet Swedish town of Karlskrona, Håkan Nordqvist crouched beneath his kitchen counter, reaching into the cabinet to fix a water pipe. It should have been routine. Instead, his hand passed through empty space, where a solid wall should have been. Curious, he pushed further, then crawled inside. What he found was not mold or plumbing. It was a tunnel. Dim, warm, and humming with a low energy, the tunnel led to a light that opened not into another room, but into the future. At least that's what Håkan claims. On the other side was his apartment, yet changed. Cleaner lines, smoother surfaces, devices that responded to touch and voice. Screens hovered in mid-air. The air itself felt charged, alive. And sitting in a chair, watching a television that played in 3 dimensions, was an old man, Håkan's future self. He recognized the eyes immediately. The older man smiled, unsurprised. They spoke, not as strangers, but as 2 versions of the same life, one fresh with questions, the other heavy with time. According to Håkan, they spent what felt like hours talking, about how the world had changed, how humanity had stumbled, then adapted, about new technologies and old mistakes, about love, regret, and the things that stay the same across decades. Before parting, the older Håkan insisted on giving his younger self something, a tattoo. Done with a device unlike any tattooing machine from 2006, painless, instant, luminescent. The ink spelled out his name and birth date in a stylized font that no typographer has since identified. Then they took a photograph together, a simple portrait. Two men, same face, separated by 40 years. The tunnel reopened. And Håkon returned. He didn't tell anyone at first, but the photograph remained. So did the tattoo, glowing faintly under certain light. When skeptics demanded proof, he produced both. The photo was examined. Digital experts confirmed it hadn't been manipulated. Facial recognition analysis confirmed the two men were, in fact, the same person, aged appropriately. The ink in the tattoo? Composed of rare elements, arranged at a molecular level unknown in current cosmetic chemistry. No one could explain it, and Håkon never tried to. He refused fame or payment. He told his story, then went back to his life. Investigators searched his apartment. No tunnel. The wall was solid concrete. The building plans confirmed it. And yet, something had passed through. Could time open its doors in the most ordinary places? Could the future reach back, not with thunder, but with curiosity? In the stillness of his kitchen, among the hum of pipes and the clatter of tools, one man claims he stepped through time, not to change history, but to meet himself. And perhaps the most human act of all is this: to look into the eyes of who we will become and to recognize that we are still the same. It began with rusted bronze and saltwater silence. In 1901, sponge divers off the coast of Antikythera, a small Greek island, stumbled upon the remains of an ancient shipwreck. Among the statues and pottery was a hunk of corroded metal, its shape distorted, its purpose unclear. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than junk, a lump of gears seized by centuries under the sea. But inside that mass lay a mechanism that would shake the foundation of what we thought ancient civilization could do. Now known as the Antikythera mechanism, this relic is often called the world's first analog computer. Dated to around 100 BCE, it contains over 30 bronze gears, finely toothed and precisely calibrated. When turned, they track the motion of the sun, moon, and known planets. They predict eclipses. They calculate the cycles of the Olympic Games. They model celestial motion with mathematical accuracy. It's a device that shouldn't exist. Historians once believed differential gearing wasn't invented until the 16th century. The mechanism's internal ratios require an understanding of irrational numbers and planetary orbits that wouldn't be formally mapped until the time of Kepler and Newton. It's as if someone reached forward across centuries of development, borrowed knowledge from the Renaissance and Industrial Age, then built it in bronze. And more unsettling, the device was not the product of generations of collaboration. Its construction bears the fingerprint of a single mind, someone with mastery over astronomy, mathematics, and precision engineering. A genius, yes, but perhaps something more. Modern CT scans revealed hidden inscriptions and components that had remained invisible for a century. They exposed additional dials, planetary indicators, and complex functions previously unimagined. One gear was found to track the Metonic cycle, a 235-month calendar alignment between lunar and solar years, with a level of detail that rivals modern astronomical software. How did this knowledge appear, fully formed, only to vanish completely for over 1,000 years? No other device like it has ever been found from that era. No texts describe it. No workshop remains. It didn't evolve. It simply was. And then wasn't. Some wonder if it was the product of a forgotten scholar, a hidden lineage of science wiped away by war or plague. Others whisper of something stranger, a traveler, a messenger, a misplaced engineer whose insights arrived too early for the world to understand. We hold the device now in a museum in Athens, encased in glass, lit from beneath like a sacred artifact. But no one has replicated it using only tools from 100 BCE, because to do so would require more than skill. It would demand a map of the cosmos written in bronze, a vision of time that bends toward the infinite. Maybe the Antikythera mechanism is not just an object. Maybe it's a question, cast into metal, buried in salt, and waiting, century by century, for us to remember how much we've forgotten. It began in the margins of a notebook, not in ink, but in foresight. Leonardo da Vinci, a name synonymous with the Renaissance, with innovation, with brilliance. We know him as an artist, an anatomist, a dreamer. But look closer. In his private pages, hidden between sketches of flying machines and saints, are visions so advanced they seem to belong not to the 15th century, but to the 21st. Da Vinci didn't just imagine flight. He diagrammed helicopters, complete with rotors and lift dynamics. He outlined parachutes with accurate gravitational theories. He designed machines with crankshafts, ball bearings, gearboxes, centuries before their formal invention. He drew the human heart as it actually works. The valves, the muscle contractions, the direction of blood flow. Knowledge that would not be officially discovered until the 17th century. His sketches of the brain hinted at the very structure of the cerebellum and nervous system long before neuroscience existed. Where did this knowledge come from? That question has haunted scholars. Because the depth of Leonardo's understanding of physics, biology, mechanics isn't just genius, it's out of place, anachronistic. More perplexing are the moments where these ideas appear fully formed, with no preliminary studies, no trial sketches, no signs of experimentation, as if he weren't inventing, but documenting, as if the answers already existed in his mind. And in some parts of his notebooks, the handwriting changes slightly. The slant, the pressure, subtle, but noticeable, as if someone else, or some other version of himself, had taken the pen. He described the moons of Jupiter before Galileo's telescope. He hinted at the Earth's axial rotation, at the properties of light, at the mechanics of combustion. He mapped rivers like satellite images. He envisioned cities with underground sewage and traffic systems. These weren't guesses. They were blueprints. Even the materials he imagined, flexible glass, synthetic polymers, aerodynamic shells, have only begun to emerge in our own time. His war machines include tanks with sloped armor, mortar launchers, gear-driven firing systems. Nothing in his world prepared him for this knowledge. Yet he had it. Some call him the greatest visionary who ever lived. Others wonder if he had access to something no one else did. A hidden manuscript? A lost teacher? Or, to more fantastically, a glimpse across time itself? What if Leonardo wasn't just ahead of his era? What if he was a bridge, a conduit between what was and what would be? A man who, for reasons unknown, carried knowledge like echoes from a future that hadn't yet arrived. We revere him as an original, but perhaps he was a recorder, capturing fragments of what humanity would eventually rediscover. And maybe, in the quiet corners of his studio, among candlelight and canvas, Leonardo da Vinci didn't just paint the future, he remembered it. It started as a walk through a familiar street and ended in another decade. Bold Street, Liverpool, a stretch of shops, cafes, and bookshops nestled in the city's center, unremarkable on the surface. But since the 1960s, it's become something else entirely, a location where time doesn't always follow the rules. Witnesses describe stepping into the past, not as a dream or vision, but as something physical, immersive. They hear the sounds of old buses, smell coal smoke in the air, touch newspaper stands that haven't existed in decades. And then, just as suddenly, they return. One of the most compelling accounts came in 1996. Frank and Carol were shopping. Frank went into a bookstore while Carol waited outside. But when he stepped back onto the street, the world had changed. The shops were different. The signs, the people, even the pavement, all from the 1960s. Frank wasn't alone. Other pedestrians around him looked equally confused, as if they, too, were caught in a moment that didn't belong to them. They made eye contact. No one spoke. Then, in a blink, the street snapped back. The modern Bold Street returned. Later, Frank described shops that had closed in the 1970s, their interiors exact down to wallpaper and product placement, details too precise to be fantasy. Photographs from city archives confirmed everything he said. He knew things no one had told him, and the pattern repeated. In 2008, a woman named Sarah stepped into what she thought was a trendy boutique, only to find herself in a 1970s department store. Employees in vintage uniforms, merchandise long out of production. She tried to pay, but her modern money was rejected. When she stepped outside, the storefront was gone, replaced by a travel agency. The shop she had entered no longer existed. Security footage from the area has captured anomalies, people pausing mid-step, walking around invisible obstacles, speaking to figures who don't appear on camera. Their movements suggest they are seeing a different version of the world, one no longer visible to us. What could cause this? Some researchers point to geology. Bold Street was built over ancient tunnels and fault lines. Mineral formations in the bedrock exhibit unusual electromagnetic properties. The time slips often coincide with specific conditions: overcast weather, high humidity, electrical storms, as if nature itself is creating temporal interference. But maybe it's something simpler. Maybe places remember. Maybe time isn't a stream, but a fabric, and in some corners of the world, it frays. The past doesn't disappear. It waits, like a photograph under glass, its colors fading but its presence enduring. And sometimes, just sometimes, a person walks across the threshold at the right moment, or the wrong one. Bold Street may be more than a shopping district. It may be a hinge, a place where the door between moments swings open without warning. And the people who pass through are left with more than confusion. They are left with the feeling that time, real, breathing time, is not behind us. It's beside us. It began in silence, a voice waiting to be heard. Edgar Cayce wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a scholar. He was a quiet man from Kentucky with a gift that defied definition. Labeled the sleeping prophet, Cayce could enter a trance and speak fluently about things he never studied: ancient history, future events, medical diagnoses, even space travel. His words were calm, measured, often poetic, but within them there were blueprints for things yet to come. Between 1901 and 1944, Cayce gave over 14,000 readings. In them, he described an interconnected world, one where time was not linear but layered, where the past, present, and future existed side by side, like rooms in a house. In 1935, he spoke of handheld devices that would allow people to communicate across the globe, predicting smartphones decades before their invention. He described a world web where people would exchange knowledge, entertainment, and commerce, a place that sounds eerily like the Internet. He warned of social isolation, mental illness, and addiction fueled by this new digital age. At a time when most homes still lacked radios, Cayce described a world flooded with invisible signals. His medical insights were equally baffling. He spoke of the role of genetics, the manipulation of DNA to heal disease, and stem cell therapies long before such concepts existed. He described organs in detail unknown to medical science at the time, later confirmed by surgeons and anatomists. And then there were his visions of space. Cayce predicted human travel beyond Earth, not just the moon, but space stations, psychological challenges in orbit, and the discovery of water on Mars. At a time when the stars were still the domain of poets, he spoke as if he had already been there. His most haunting statements were about consciousness. Cayce believed we would one day prove the existence of the soul. That science would discover that thought itself is energy, measurable, transformative, capable of bending reality. He foresaw machines powered not by fuel, but by intention. Cities built around harmony with natural forces. Technology emerging from empathy, not industry. Was he a prophet, a fraud, a man ahead of his time, or someone who, in trance, stepped out of time altogether? Neurological studies of Cayce's brainwaves during his sessions revealed unusual gamma activity, patterns associated with deep meditation, dream states, and, curiously, time perception. It was as if his mind wandered not just across thoughts, but across centuries. He described Atlantis, Lemuria, Egypt, with details unknown to archaeology until decades later. And always he spoke of patterns, cycles, echoes, as if time wasn't moving forward but repeating, in spirals. Perhaps Cayce didn't see the future. Perhaps he remembered it. In the quiet of his voice there's something familiar, the kind of truth that doesn't shout but settles. The feeling that somewhere deep within us we already know what's coming. Because maybe, in dreams, in visions, in flickers of déjà vu, we are all time travelers. And time is simply listening. It began with a photograph lost in time. In the early 1940s, a group of workers gathered at a bridge opening ceremony in Canada. Among the crowd stood a man who didn't seem to belong. He wore modern sunglasses, a logoed shirt, and held what looked remarkably like a compact camera decades ahead of its time. His haircut, his posture, even the way he looked at the world, all felt different. The image, unearthed from a museum archive years later, spread across the internet like wildfire. People dubbed him the time-traveling hipster, and at first glance it's easy to see why. The contrast is striking. The other attendees wear hats, suits, and post-war expressions. But this man, he could have stepped out of a 21st century concert. Skeptics searched for explanations. Could the sunglasses have existed back then? Was the logo just a coincidence? Was the camera a rare model lost to history? Piece by piece, they tried to reconstruct the image into something familiar, but the unease remained. Not because the photo was doctored, it wasn't, but because it felt real, and yet wrong. This wasn't the only time something like this surfaced. In another photograph from 1917, children play with what appears to be a smartphone-sized object. They hold it like we do today. Their expressions mirror the quiet concentration of a generation raised on screens. And again, no explanation fits neatly. Time slips, glitches, anomalies, the language we use to describe these events often says more about our discomfort than our understanding. We live in a world obsessed with proof, but photographs, once seen as evidence, now live in an uncanny valley, caught between pixels and memory. What makes these images powerful isn't just what they show, it's how they feel, like echoes from a future we weren't meant to see. If time travel were real, subtle, undramatic, precise, wouldn't it look exactly like this? A stranger in the background, a shadow out of place, a gesture too modern. Maybe the question isn't whether these figures traveled through time. Maybe the question is, why would they come here? To witness, to study, to remember, or, more poetically, to leave a breadcrumb, a reminder that the line between yesterday and tomorrow may not be as solid as we think, and that memory, when captured in silver and light, can sometimes whisper truths that logic refuses to hear. Because maybe time travel doesn't begin with machines or equations. Maybe it begins with looking twice at an old photograph and realizing someone else was already watching. It began beneath the waves, with a whisper from the deep. For years, the island of Bimini in the Bahamas was little more than a quiet tourist retreat. But in 1968, divers exploring its clear waters stumbled upon something ancient. A long, rectangular formation of stones, heavy, flat, and precisely aligned. They called it the Bimini Road. Some said it was natural, eroded limestone, coincidence, but others saw something else, the foundation of a lost city, a sunken structure swallowed by the sea. And then the whispers began to echo. Could this be Atlantis? That question, dismissed by most scholars, found new fuel in the writings of a man who had died 2 decades earlier. Edgar Cayce had predicted that parts of Atlantis would rise again, specifically near Bimini, in the late 1960s. And here it was, right on time. Geologists debated. Some insisted the stones were geological formations. Others pointed to chisel marks, right angles, and unnatural symmetry. Independent researchers found what they believed were column bases, stone anchors, and road patterns stretching further into the sea. But no consensus ever formed. The mystery grew when sonar mapping revealed even stranger anomalies beneath the surrounding seafloor. Grid-like patterns, seemingly artificial mounds, and geometric shadows that refused to be explained away. Then came the testimonies. Divers swore they'd heard strange humming sounds below. Some described moments of disorientation, as if time moved differently underwater. A few even claimed to see flickers, lights beneath the sand, as though something ancient still pulsed beneath the ruins. Skeptics argued for restraint. They called it pseudoscience, wishful thinking. But the deeper the exploration went, the harder it became to dismiss everything as coincidence. If this was once a city, then it was not just old. It was impossibly old. Older than any known human structure. Older than the pyramids. Older than memory. What if Bimini was not Atlantis, but something related? A fragment? A marker? And what if the stories of Atlantis, of a civilization lost not to myth but to time, were less about geography and more about warning? Maybe what was lost wasn't just land. Maybe it was knowledge, a kind of understanding we once had, about the world, about time, about our place in it, that we've long since buried. The sea holds secrets. It preserves and swallows, remembers and erases. It blurs the line between what is forgotten and what is waiting. And maybe, when the light hits just right beneath the surface, when the current stills and the silence deepens, it doesn't just reflect us. It shows us what we've become, and what we might once have been. Because some ruins aren't ancient, they're reminders. And some disappearances don't mark the end of something. They mark the beginning of a story we haven't yet learned to read. It began with a whisper, not from the past, but from the future. Across the world, from dusty archives to whispered dreams, stories have emerged of individuals who seemed to know too much too soon. They spoke of future technologies, global shifts, and scientific insights long before the world was ready to hear them. Some were laughed at, others were forgotten, but their visions now linger, half fulfilled. They weren't prophets. Not exactly. They didn't speak in riddles or cloaked metaphors. They gave details, descriptions, sometimes diagrams. They named places, dates, concepts that had yet to enter the public imagination. A farmer in Nebraska who, in 1899, described wireless energy fields and light towers that could carry communication across continents. A schoolteacher in Romania who wrote in her journals about machines that could read thoughts. Entries later discovered, never published, eerily aligned with 21st century neural interface patents. A 13-year-old girl in 1921 who painted glowing images of planets no one had photographed yet, including Saturn with its rings tilted at angles only later confirmed by satellite imaging. These are not stories with conclusions. They are fragments, unexplained, easily dismissed, unless you begin to see the pattern. Most appeared briefly, then vanished. Some left journals, others only memories in those who met them. They didn't seek attention. They weren't selling books or leading movements. They simply appeared, like echoes misplaced in time. Modern science calls them coincidences, or anomalies in cognition, precognition perhaps, but always dismissed with a wave of rationality. And yet, how do we explain the child who described the Internet in 1904? The man who warned of a city in the sky made of metal falling to the earth 60 years before the Challenger disaster? Or the woman who, in 1963, spoke of people carrying glass rectangles that showed them images and let them talk to the world? They didn't say they were time travelers. But maybe they didn't have to. Maybe time, as we understand it, isn't a highway, but a spiral. And in certain moments, with the right mind, the right conditions, something opens. A leak, a ripple, a crack. Information escapes. Visions drift backwards. Ideas arrive before their time, handed off like seeds to minds who may not understand them. These individuals, the anonymous visionaries, are not proof of time travel, but they are evidence of something more elusive, that knowledge does not always flow forward, that inspiration may not be bound by the calendar, and that truth, like water, finds a way. Perhaps the future is already here. It simply hasn't been recognized yet. And maybe, as we look back at these impossible stories, we're not just studying history. We're reading messages that were never meant for their own time, but for ours. It ends not with certainty, but with a question. We've traveled through fragments, through sightings and whispers, diagrams and dreams. From dusty shipyards to silent gardens, from sunken stones to flickering screens. And through it all, a single thread remains, the human desire to understand time, not as a straight line, but as something alive. Each story we've explored challenges the rules we take for granted. A man appears in Times Square in clothes a century out of date. A notebook holds blueprints for machines that wouldn't exist for hundreds of years. A stranger walks through a premiere holding a device no one else can see. Are these proof of time travel, or are they something subtler? Perhaps they're evidence of a deeper truth, that time is porous, that memory and imagination are not so different, that under certain circumstances, trauma, genius, sleep, stillness, the walls between past, present, and future grow thin. We like to believe we're grounded in the now, but even our own minds betray us. Déjà vu, prophetic dreams, childhood memories that resurface without cause. These are not anomalies, they are clues. Clues that time is not fixed. It pulses, it loops, it remembers. And if we are willing to listen, not with instruments but with attention, we might find that the most powerful time machine is not built from steel and circuits. It is built from consciousness. The stories we've shared are not final answers. They're invitations to stay curious, to remain open, to wonder, even when wonder makes us uncomfortable. For every John Titor who disappears into the digital fog, there is someone who reads his words and feels a chill of recognition. For every shadowy figure on Bold Street, there's a passerby who feels just for a second that they're being watched by the past. We are not separate from time. We are woven into it, not passengers, but participants, not victims, but vessels. And maybe, just maybe, the future is not a destination. Maybe it's a memory. So we leave this journey where it began, with a question, not, is time travel real? But something quieter, more human. What if the most important moments of our lives, the ones that feel too strange, too vivid, too impossible, aren't mistakes in memory? What if they're glimpses of a timeline we almost lived, or a future waiting to find us again? And what if one day we recognize it, not in theory, not in proof, but in a feeling? A familiar face in a crowd, a sentence we've never heard, but somehow know. A sudden pause in the rhythm of the world, and in that silence, time whispers, "I remember you."